Hey guys, now that it's nearing the end of the year, I wanted to share with you guys the kind of homework my apprentices have been doing this past year, what the assignments looked like, and what it's like being an apprentice on my Patreon. I also did something differently this year. I allowed students to hand in whatever they wanted. If they feel like the alternative homework is too difficult for them, allow them to hand in whatever they've got so that they could at least get that guidance as an apprentice. My apprenticeship welcomes students of all skill levels. It's a very, very low pressure environment. There's flexibility to the assignments. There are deadlines for homework, and there's all kinds of assignments that help you find your strengths as an artist, what you like doing, what you don't like doing, and the assignments always move back to the fundamentals in some way. So there's always some kind of knowledge supplementation. So at the start of the year, I always assign introductory assignments, form studies, portraits, stuff that helps me get to know the apprentice, helps me understand what their weaknesses are and the kind of assignments I'll be assigning that year. Diagnosing them helps me generate a climate of difficulty for them for the assignments moving forward. So we started off with the introductory assignments for my patrons, and they handed in simple to advanced form studies depending on their difficulty and what they can handle. And then for February, we did a couple more anatomy breakdown studies that help you understand the power of diagramming and how to build anatomy knowledge through grid lines, through mesh surfaces, and understanding surface areas, and all of the basic form substructure behind anatomy and geometric anatomy. Then the homework that followed that, we looked at face rotation, rotating the portrait with zero reference, just figuring out how the students feel about rotating the face, and stacking in 3/4 view and the fundamentals behind that. And there's also the comparison of working with reference and without reference, and how students fared between the two. What it's like to work with reference, and how much knowledge are you supplementing, and how much of that knowledge is missing without reference. Most of my assignments help the student get to know themselves, what their weaknesses are. As much as I need to diagnose them, they're also diagnosing themselves. Then after the preliminary study assignments, we went into the more creative stuff and designed some characters. But every time there's a character design or creative assignment of some kind, there is always an additional texture assignment embedded in the homework. The fundamentals are always addressed. The fundamentals are always front and center at some level. And I try to find a balance between fun homework and homework that's educational. We did some illustrations, and this time we looked into the drafting process of illustrations, creating thumbnails, mood boards, research, and working with narratives, how to build a narrative, how to rely on your narrative, and how to stay true to it. We moved from fundamental studies to character design to full-on illustration in a very slow and steady process. There wasn't much pressure, but there was always that open resource for anyone who was willing to push themselves a little bit further. So again, with these illustration assignments, you always have the option of doing more simple homework that's easy for you for your current level. There is always going to be the lecture at the end of the month where I critique all the pieces and I touch on everything that everyone worked on. And then for the summer between June and July, I did a texture lab. It was all about learning textures, raising your mileage for texture knowledge, brush knowledge, how to control your brush when attempting different textures. And I gave my students a whole list of textures to pick from, and just working on their material studies and texture studies, knowing how to render them when it's time to render them for their illustrations and their character designs. One of the textures that we did for the late summer is fabric fold, which I think is one of the most important textures to learn. Sometimes students don't understand that there's a lot of geometry and edge work under all of that cylindrical, organic movement of fabric. That's something that I really wanted to make sure that my students had a better hold over by the end of the year. And then to keep things balanced, after the texture lab for the summer, we did lots of line and gesture knowledge. So this one was important because it was all about learning efficiency and line economy. So that was a big one. Because of the amount of line dependence out there, I knew at least once in the year we had to focus for a good month on what we're looking at when we think line dependence and the healthy use of lines and the unhealthy use of lines. And then at the end of the year, I make sure that my students do their environment thumbnails. I make sure that at least once a year we study basic fundamentals of environments, the rules of depth, layers of depth, the layers of their PSDs, how to approach environments, how to think about different materials and how they look from a large scale perspective, camera angle, everything that goes into creating a really, really immersive environment, and making sure that they have that knowledge moving forward. If they ever wanted to dip their toes into some kind of environment study, they have access to that kind of fundamental. And the pieces that were handed in were just breathtaking. from all different kinds of skill levels. And then for October, I asked my students to just do something fun. For the Halloween season, I asked my students to have a bit more fun and kind of just relax a little bit and work on something spooky and not necessarily have any kind of fundamental weight behind it. Just have fun with the illustration knowledge they've developed. And we did something a little bit more difficult for November. Recently, I assigned them a portrait study, but a portrait study that is combined with a texture. They can always pick and choose in the difficulty spectrum and do homework that they feel like they can handle while also balancing the challenge for themselves. And there's always a challenge if you need one in my apprenticeship. There's always flexibility if you need it in my apprenticeship. It's a resource that provides you with support on your journey without you feeling like you are expected to do too much or paint subjects that you're not ready for. It's always about you and what you can handle. And that's how I like to work. I customize all curriculums between apprentices and private students because I don't feel like challenging a student outside of their realm is okay. And I also don't feel like being too relaxed is okay. Finding a balance through communication is extremely important. And that's why at the start of every year between January and February, I do entry-level diagnostic pieces. At the end of every year since I started apprenticeship, I ask my students to repaint an old piece and critique themselves and basically talk to me about what they believe they've improved on in the last year, in the last 5 years, and what they feel like they need to improve on moving forward. So it's going to be really, really fun seeing those pieces painted over. So if you want to become an apprentice, now's the time to join. Some students join in the middle of the year, some students join at the end of the year. You can also hand in old assignments from the previous year, and I will still critique it. And that's my apprenticeship program. If you guys are interested, please join me there. Not only is being an apprentice beneficial for you and your development, but it's also supporting my community and all the free classes I'm offering for everyone globally. I have hundreds and hundreds of free hours available to everyone, and I want to keep that community alive for everybody. So being a patron supports this entire community and it keeps it alive for years to come. And if you guys want to support, please join me on Patreon. They get different levels of rewards, from PSDs to brushes to videos, and my personal art journey videos, my own personal work is posted to all my patrons. From the brushes that I use to the PSDs, everything is handed into my apprentices every month. If you guys want to join me, please find me on patreon.com/Istebrak.